how members of the first Christian community lived as being one in mind and heart. One in mind and heart. And one way that that unity was expressed was for them to hold their possessions in common. This is referring primarily to the Christian community, the apostles and those who were in Jerusalem following the resurrection of Jesus. Apparently, they sold their possessions and distributed the proceeds to people who were in need. They lived as a family, united by their faith and united by their love and care for each other. We even hear about a man named Barnabas who sold a piece of property and laid the proceeds at the feet of the apostles so that they could use that money to distribute to the poor. This idea of sharing property and resources really was an ideal that was embraced, but it didn't last very long. Eventually, as the Christian community grew, it became less realistic to have everyone pool their resources. Even so, the Christian community, from the beginning, always had as one of its defining characteristics the desire to provide for people who were in need. The poor, the widow, the orphan, these were the people who were cared for by the Christian community. We also see this ideal of holding possessions in common being practiced by monastic and religious communities that were at first pretty much founded by Saint Benedict. Monasteries of men and women put this apostolic discipline into practice. They embraced poverty on an individual basis, but they put their personal resources into a common fund so that everybody in the community could be supported. Today, there are religious communities that practice this ideal of shared resources, but we don't impose this ideal on everyone. Imagine the revolt that would occur if I told you to bring all your money and put it in a common pool here, and I'll administer it, right? I think our church would be emptied in a matter of days. But we do embrace the teachings of Christ that we are to share our resources with people who are in need. Each of us has to give as is possible for the well-being of the faith community, but most importantly, for the poor. Each of us is obliged to reach out to people, even those who are not members of our faith community, but are among the poor. So in every way, generosity and good stewardship of our resources should be one of the defining characteristics of any church, any synagogue, any place of worship. Now, all of this, of course, comes to us by way of example. Not just the example of the apostles, but the fact that they looked to Christ as the example of how to live. It's clear that Jesus himself did not own any possessions, except perhaps for the tunic that he wore. He was dependent on the goodness of others who supported his ministry. And in turn, what did he do? He gave himself entirely to those who were in need. His healing ministry, his teaching ministry, his death on the cross. These were the ways that Jesus practiced poverty. He emptied himself and became poor for our sake. So we should remember that this was the example that he set, not just as a matter of living when he did on this earth, but as an example of how we can live today. As we move through this Easter season, it really is a celebration of God's generosity when it comes right down to it. God became poor, so to speak, by sharing his Son with us entirely. In Christ, we learn that we have everything we need. We should remember that when it comes to sharing our personal